Hey guys, welcome back to World of Warships. Today we're taking a look at the buffed Zhao. This ship has now been buffed a couple of times since it was originally released. Back in the day, Zhao was an absolute powerhouse. But that was around 10 years ago, or close to 10 years ago now. There's been a little power creep, as we all know at Tier 10. Zhao struggled quite a lot in the last few years. They did give it a nice health buff, so now with some of these changes, we can get over 50,000 HP on it. Pretty nice. But we're still lacking a little something. This ship used to have some decent armor, 30 millimeters of armor. Used to be pretty good when Yamato was the only ship in the game that could overmatch it. As we know, there's a lot of 30 mil overmatch these days. So what have they done to buff Zhao this time? It's gonna be the firing angles of your turrets, as well as your torpedo tubes. Really a very nice change. It doesn't really impact the DPM output, the damage output of the Zhao directly. It makes the ship more comfortable to play. And that's the real issue with bad turret angles on any ship. GK is a great example of that as well. Hint, hint, Wargaming. Can we take a look at GK firing angles? They won't, I'm sure, but Zhao getting this buff is so nice. The ship is so comfy to play again. This ship used to feel pretty good because we didn't have as much overmatch. You could afford to turn an angle while still getting all of your guns off every once in a while, angle to the 406 battleships, and you'd be relatively okay. I'll show that off a little bit in some of these games when we're fighting 406 or lower battleships. The armor still holds up against those ships. It's just that overmatch that really hurts. So you have to be avoiding shells now instead of trying to bounce them off of your armor. And with that, we have very nice turret angles now. They also unified the turret angles. So this ship no longer has one turret or two turrets able to fire, three turrets, but not all four when you're actually getting enough angle to use them all. So 36 degrees forward firing angles, really nice. We used to have some around 44, 45 degree firing angles to shoot all four. I think that was just one turret though that you couldn't shoot at that angle. But still, very nice improvement there. 36 forward, you're still broadside enough, you can take citadels. But given the turning radius as well as our rudder shift, that really isn't too bad to deal with these days. And when you're kiting, it's even better. 34 degrees when you're at a kiting angle. So you're still incentivized to kite. That is what Zhao was better at before, and it still will be here. But really usable angles forward means you're not as punished for getting caught bow in or to play more aggressive yourself, and you will need to. That's one of the downsides of Zhao. Yes, it's more comfortable now, but the meta has changed a lot since Zhao was released. Things are much more passive now. People play a lot further back. While playing Zhao, I spent a lot of time trying to get some good games with it, and it was difficult. Of course, some of that was just down to blowouts. We know those exist. They happen rather often these days. But the other problem I found, even in the closer games, I just didn't have the range to deal with the enemy team playing so far back. That's the real other issue here. And if you want to play a little further forward in Zhao, well, then you're going to be the target of focus. You're going to have to be good at dodging that incoming fire or positioning yourself around islands that cut off firing angles. Zhao has incredible shell velocity. This ship is very easily able to hit targets towards the edge of its range. But that means you can't farm over islands. You can't play safe around islands like you might in a Des Moines, let's say. You have to find islands that deal with that crossfire, but don't impact your ability to shoot targets. It's a little bit tricky to find those positions without getting caught in crossfires or just playing open water. Can be difficult to do the open water thing. You could also try a bit of a Lighthouse build. I did try that a little bit, and the damage output is extreme, very powerful. You still have 14.1 kilometer detect with a Lighthouse build. But again, I found myself in games that were just so passive. It was very difficult to make use of. Zhao with its concealment is a massive strength. Here's what happens when you don't appreciate battleship fire. Yes, we take the citadel to the Yamato there. So it does have an above water citadel still. That is a weak point of this ship. You do have to be very careful around battleships. But the concealment, you have one of the best heavy cruiser detections in the entire game. It's like 9.9 at tier 10, certainly. some of the better concealment on heavy cruiser guns. This was the original Venezia, if you remember that ship's playstyle of maybe sneaking up and one-shotting destroyers or getting a massive salvo into destroyers. That's what Zhao did back in the day, much better than anything else. Before Venice was introduced, that ship kind of took over that role. But we still have better detection than Ven, so that is a nice bonus here. Also, these torpedo tube firing angles, I gotta mention, are also much improved. It's still 50 degrees forward, so not the most comfortable there to use when you're pushing in, but Zhao shouldn't be pushing, right? You should be trying to kite in this thing or deal with enemy teams pushing into you. And that's where the buff to the rear firing angles on these torps is so nice. Now you can fire them at a 30-degree angle backwards. Really, really comfy to use. If you're able to fire all your guns backwards, you're able to fire all your torpedoes backwards. Really, really nice change. It's the comfort level of playing the ship that they've changed here. It's not a buff to its armor or survivability directly that way, or HP directly, or its firepower, its DPM, its fire chance, its alpha damage directly. But what it does do is it buffs your survivability, it buffs your damage output just by being more comfortable to use all of your guns without sacrificing on angles and getting one shot by battleships and that kind of thing. Really, really love a change like this. It's a little more nuanced, it's a little more subtle, and it does matter for this ship, but it doesn't break the game as much as some other gimmick heavy or I mean, let's be honest, Columbo legendary upgrade and its Sigma dispersion buff that it received all throughout last year is a decent way to buff a ship. Makes it a lot stronger, makes it more impactful, but it also makes it kind of overpowered and not very fun to fight. This buff for Zhao is what I like to see, rather. It makes the ship more comfortable to play without dramatically impacting the meta and just becoming this world beater meta-defining ship. But that said, it will be a tricky one to play with the more passive games. Pushing in will be harder. We got ourselves a Witherer here, 10 fires. Zhao has always been a great fire spammer. The alpha damage here is awesome, coupled with our dispersion. Maybe that's one of the crucial points on a Zhao that can be missed if you're not looking too closely at some of the stats on this ship. 178,000 HE DPM is not amazing. It's pretty low as far as HE farmers go. But the crucial point here is you're hitting more of your shells. We talk about this when it comes to secondaries, right? The secondary DPM doesn't really matter. It's your hitting DPM. That's why the battleships that have the improved secondary accuracy are so much better than ones with outright better DPM. Just because all that matters is the shells you hit. So for Zhao, with better dispersion and a legendary upgrade that further improves that dispersion, you have effectively very high damage output. Daring here at close range, oh yes, you absolutely crush destroyers. He's on 10,000 damage. We hit 10 shells, over 8,000 damage. Yes, Ven Sap would do a lot as well, but HE, man, does a ton of damage still with the Zhao. The alpha damage, the accuracy, really, really nice to play. Angling to the Missouri here, that 30 mil plating showing how useful it used to be when the battleships all had 406mm guns, except for the Yamato. Although back in the day, most ships only had 27mm. This is a very long time ago. A bit of a boomer moment here. Wow's old head moment. But Zhao was the only tier 10 cruiser to have 30mm of armor before Hindenburg came into the game. So it was the only one that could auto-bounce Montana shells, Iowa shells. Every other cruiser in the game would get overmatched by 406s. It's kind of weird how we've had this pendulum swinging back and forth of power creep on armor, power creep on overmatch. It just swings back and forth over and over again. But back in the day, most cruisers still got overmatched by 406s. Kind of funny now how it's 457s. It's the 30 mil overmatch that is similar to how it was back in the day. But it does mean that these older cruisers that did have that gimmick as an advantage, the armor values of 30mm being so powerful, get hurt quite a lot these days now that the standard overmatch value has changed to overmatching 30 instead of 406s overmatching, what, 28, something like that. 27 was the threshold you'd get over with 406s. That was the goal there. So a little bit unfortunate for things like Zhao. Hindenburg as well fits that archetype. Old cruisers that used to be very tanky thanks to that 30 mil plating that no longer are. For Zhao, very nice to get this buff to its firing angles, helping it avoid a lot of that incoming damage. If you haven't played your Zhao in a while, definitely give it a go. It is a very comfy ship to play again. You'll notice that a lot of our damage here is coming from the HE. I didn't get the most opportunities to use the AP, but don't count out the AP. It is very, very powerful. The dispersion is awesome. You have surprisingly solid pen thanks to the shell velocity here. That is something I should mention. The Zhao guns are different from the tier 9, the tier 8, tier 7 203s that you're getting throughout this line. They do have much, much better shell velocity and actually a bit more damage as well, I believe. So really nice. 10k in on the Zhao first salvo. Another 10k in on the Zhao second salvo. This ship does so much damage, and you still get punished, though, if you're not angling properly here. Over 200,000 in this one. Feels pretty good. The maneuverability also quite solid here. We're going to try and angle in and avoid some salvos. We do get hit by that one, but what I want you to notice, we're going to drift around the next two salvos. And what do I mean by that? You can shift your rudder here, and you almost slide around the shells. It's kind of weird how that works, but ships drift a little bit in this game. And when you're shooting at an enemy ship and they're about to cross over from showing either the left or right side of their ship to you, that's when they're going to just seem to drift around your shells. And that's how we're going to try and avoid incoming damage at these closer ranges. Did it well for 2 salvos and then missed it on the third there. It's not always going to work. It's not always going to be reliable, but it is a tactic you can use. Decent damage here out of Zhao. 212. I was a little disappointed while playing it. I'm not going to lie. Not that this is bad by any reason, but I know Zhao is capable of more, especially with how comfortable it felt. I felt like I should have been able to get at least 250,000 damage in this ship. I just think either I was misplaying it, wasn't playing aggressive enough perhaps, or some of the games just don't support this ship all that well. The range is a bit lacking. Certainly, you want to be taking range mod or the legendary upgrade, over 17 kilometers of range with legendary upgrade, or you get yourself over 18 with the range upgrade. But that's still not enough to deal with the 20-kilometer pre-kited meta that we have these days. So you got to be maybe a little more patient than I am a lot of times these days. I'll admit it. I'm not the most patient person in the world. I want the action to come through. It's in the marketing materials, Wargaming. I want to see that action gameplay. So pushing into a Bourgogne here, we see the power of those torps, and we see the power of the AP. Nearly 20,000 damage. 11 full pens, 1 overpen. I do believe we have the pen to actually get through North Carolina Citadel there. I guess I didn't aim low enough, unfortunately. But 20,000 alpha damage without a Citadel, the AP is certainly very powerful. And this is situations where we're pushing, right? This is where we don't want to be in a Zhao. It is more comfortable now. I'm glad Wargaming have changed it, so it is more comfortable in these situations. Because there are times where people are just going to run off the screen, and you have to go chase them if you want to have any damage. Certainly in a cyclone like this one, not what you should be doing, let's be honest here, but we're going to try and launch some torpedo salvos. We're caught in a 3-way crossfire here. There's an NC that's about to pop up, actually. Getting citadels on Stalingrad, but the angle's helping us out a lot to get some torpedoes off on these guys. Certainly the forward firing angles could be a little better on these torpedoes. But what's really nice about these torpedoes, if you're maybe thinking of your Atago, if you've played Atago before, you'll know the turret or the torp angles are very solid. But you can only fire 1 torp launcher per quarter of your torpedo arc, let's say. The front left torp only fires forwards and left. It can't fire backwards and left, for example. You can shoot both torp launchers during the full arc of this torpedo angle here, which is really nice as well. And those torpedoes do immense damage. Really, really solid damage. They don't have the range, though. Something like the Yodo has much longer range torpedoes. There's a few times where I launched some maybe zoning torps, I guess we would say, just hoping that someone would cross a gap or something like that. And they just barely ranged out because, again, the ranges are played a little further back these days. So 12-kilometer torps, very good. But sometimes you're going to find they just don't quite have the range to be all that useful these days. Now on to our Lighthouse build game. You're going to see why it's a little bit uncomfortable to play with 30 millimeters of armor against battleships that overmatch you and are playing a little bit further back. where we do have to dodge a lot of that incoming fire. It's difficult to do, but look at this rudder shift here as we're playing with this build. The damage output is also going to be higher, even if we're spotted more often. It is a lot of damage output that you gain from running this Lighthouse build. The torps are a little bit more awkward to use thanks to being further range. We're just going to play further back because we're spotted more often. And that's okay, because the torps you can use to torp gaps or to torp around islands as you're pushing in, or using islands as your cover to deal with incoming fire or prevent people from getting crossfires on you, for example. Slow down, turn out. GK doesn't get too much damage to us. Very nice. Henry can be a very tricky cruiser to deal with. Also has incredibly powerful guns, but even with only 3 turrets, yeah, that's over 7,000 damage, and we finish him off just like that. Heavy HE is doing a lot of work to give us even more impactful salvos. And those torpedoes, as we spam C to actually get the view for them. Yes, GK. Dev strikes? No, actually, he eats some torps regardless. So we don't quite have enough HP left to get the dev strike, but 3 torpedo hits. We'll take it. We'll take it. We got to get those torps being used. It is a nice benefit to have this torpedo range. Even 12 kilometers is enough. Even if I do wish we had those 15s maybe that we see on the Yodo. Here's going to be a very nice position to get into. As always with Zao, we do want that kiting position. Even though, again, those torp angles and turret angles do help you when you have to push in to people. You'd much rather be in a position like this. And this is one of the better positions we could find ourselves in. We're not spotted here at all, and yet we're still able to use our guns over these islands. That's, again, the tricky part to deal with, is that good shell velocity can be a bit of a downside. We don't have our plane right now, and obviously I've been talking about using this plane throughout this whole video as range buffs to deal with the passive meta, but it is really nice to have a plane to see over these islands too, to get the right aim point. Sometimes I'm going to miss here just purely because I'm not leading quite correct. I'm trying to use the minimap. I'm trying to use my... when you spam M to look at the map, you can get a bit of a brief bird's eye view. You could also use your plane-based ASWs to get a better view. But that's not as easy as just using your spotter plane, right? Speaking of ASWs, I didn't even talk about that at all yet. It's a minor thing, but Zao does have the sub-surveillance thing, basically radar for submarines. It's useful enough, but with 8-kilometer ASWs, 7-kilometer submarine surveillance, it's okay. It's fine. But with Zao, you're playing so far back, right? You're typically this kiting cruiser. Oftentimes, you're not getting close enough to actually make use of it. Maybe you should. Maybe that's a reason to look at the more concealment-focused builds. Maybe I should be looking at that more often, but I don't know. I just find that gameplay so poorly designed. I'm not going to go into a rant. We're not ranting about subs here. This is Zao, but it's just not engaging enough for me to want to engage, actually play against submarines and try and use these tools. It's awful. It is just awful in my opinion. Hayate here, long range, slowing down in smoke. We're going to see that Zao alpha damage and shell velocity here, the accuracy, all add up into 5 hits. Nearly half our shells hit at such a long range. You love to see it. Massive damage into DDs here. Really, really powerful thing to have. Hoffman as well, getting spotted in his smokes. This is what you want to do with Zao, right? You don't have the radar. You don't have that utility. That can be a downside for a lot of these ships. But if you're close enough to help out on those DD engagements, Zao massively improves your win rate just by dealing with those enemy destroyers, because it does so much damage into those DDs, even with this Lighthouse build. Obviously, the concealment build is a little bit better for that, but when we're dealing with battleships at longer ranges, that rudder shift can really help us out a lot, especially in that kiting position. You'll notice we do have to give just a bit more broadside again when we're bow in or pushing towards the enemy ships. It is unfortunate that it's so passive these days, I suppose, but Kraken Unleashed, we will take it. Pretty solid game here with the Zao, with the Lighthouse build. We do have one more for you, and I got to admit, I spliced this one in here because I realized after editing this whole video together, I forgot to include a Lighthouse build when I had some okay games in it. Kraken here, bit of throwing, not even using Yamamoto, I'm sorry. But this is the game that should have been after the Torp build there. I apologize for not making this the most seamless thing in the world, but back to the original commentary, I suppose. This last game I have to show for you, again, showing off that, well, more long-range meta. Just look at where the enemy ships are. And I gotta point this out as well. I don't blame the players, okay? I'm not blaming the players. Maybe a little bit. People could afford to play more aggressive. It's a choice, but Wargaming has crafted a meta where this is how you play. This is how you get rewarded. You get punished for pushing in very hard. You're gonna die very quickly. You learn in this game to not push in. And this one is an example of a smoked up Sherman, a Howden on an island up close. They lost their DD. I get it, okay? You're never gonna survive pushing into this, okay? I totally get it. But the way Wargaming has made this game, the ship design, the new ships, the gimmicks, all of that has led to a meta where you just can't push, right? And so everybody just plays back at the start, and they continue to play back in the mid game, and they continue to play back in the late game. So for a Zao that really benefits from people pushing into it, you know, here's the irony, right? Here's the real irony. I fully understand that this is what I'm saying. I'm complaining about people not pushing into my ship that's designed to counter people pushing in, right? At the core of it, that's what I'm doing. I'm complaining about people not gifting their ship to me, okay? I understand the irony and the hypocrisy about that, but it means this ship can feel a little awkward to play at times. Look at our positioning here. We're barely 5 minutes into this game. I'm in their side of the A cap, right? Like, these games happen, and it's blowouts, I know, but I played this ship for like 3.5 hours, I think, non-stop. Maybe there was a Tulsa game that was requested partway through that. That ship also got a buff. We got so many buff ships to take a look at. It's going to be a fun month, I gotta say. I do love these balance changes. I like when Wargaming goes back and takes a look at older ships. But Zao being more comfortable doesn't mean the meta is more hospitable to a heavy cruiser that is a damage farmer that has 17, 18 kilometers of range. It is still going to be a bit tricky to play, and you don't have that poor shell velocity that helps you out in maps that give you islands to farm over. Here's an example of me using an island to deal with crossfires. Maybe there's a Thunderer or a Zao or a Montana or the Worcester or the GK. I'm in a position here where they just can't shoot me. The only person that can shoot me is the Kremlin, who I'm also directly shooting at. And that means I'm able to use my acceleration as well as my rudder to hopefully dodge some incoming salvos. Reversing towards the enemy can be a great strategy as well, thanks to our better firing angles when we're kiting. It also means that if we get into trouble, then we can actually just accelerate out of the situation. We can go dark with our excellent concealment. We dictate the fight, right? That's why concealment is so powerful. You decide when to fire, when to get spotted, or not. That's why Zao and other ships with great concealment are so powerful. Learning to use that concealment is a key feature of this game, and for a lot of ships, that's where a lot of their power comes from. Deciding when to go dark, not get spotted, stay undetected, wait for that moment of opportunity to get that big salvo through, or to reposition, to go dark, to get to a new island cover, to get to a new position, cross the map, where the enemy teams may be pushing the other side, for example. All of that is done through concealment, where if we're just firing all the time, then maybe we're having a good game because the enemy team is in range and we're having good damage farming time, or maybe I'm not maximizing my ship's potential because I'm too focused on firing at these longer ranges and not repositioning to a better spot to get more damage in the future. We're still getting good damage this game, but I do have to mention that if you're going to go play your Zao, you might find that some of the games are a little bit awkward to play when it is so passive. And again, not blaming players, okay? Not blaming the players too much. It is about Wargaming and their inability, I suppose, to craft a meta that matches the brawling action marketing material that they put out. Have you guys noticed that? Have you noticed that the ads for this game, the marketing material, man? It's so close range, brawling, actions focused, and like torp runs, all of that stuff. It's so close range, and yet you go play the game and it's like planes and long range farming. I don't know. Maybe it's impossible at the end of the day for them to not have that happen. Maybe that's just the end game of a game like this when people realize what the optimal way to play is. But I wish they could do something about that. Maybe it would have to be just across the board nerfing dispersion on every ship at long range, and maybe that would help. Maybe just making it so ineffective to hit targets at long range. But then you'd have the problem of, say, Libertad showing us an example of when you give ships maybe the best survivability we've ever seen at close range and secondaries that pen everything everywhere. Like, what do you do with that at close range? If you get caught inside those secondaries, you just melt. You have to stay further back from it. So if you were to nerf dispersion at longer ranges, so people are incentivized to get closer if they want to do damage, then ships like that would become even more crazy than they already are. I don't know the answer, okay? That's what I'm trying to say. I don't know the answer. This is just a random thought I had while making this video, I suppose. So it's not well thought through, but what is well thought through on my side is that I'm not a fan of the sniping meta. And I know Zao is a ship that really preys on people pushing into it, so it makes sense people don't want to push into Zao. It's so good at farming people as they push in. But it does mean that this buff is really nice. It's really comfy to play, but Zao playing in a meta that is very different than the 2015, 2016 meta that we used to play it in back when it was so popular and so powerful means it's still not the same ship that it once was, and I think that is down to the meta and not down to this buff. It's comfortable, and I'm glad they made this buff, but unfortunately, the meta can be a little bit rough for an older ship like this one. As for the builds here that I was running on Zao, I did like the concealment build more, again, just to play more comfortably around some of those longer range games. It can be a little bit painful to run the full Lighthouse build, for example, but this is what I was running for a more standard concealment build. 9.9 kilometer detect. We're pretty quick. We still have decent rudder shift time and nice enough survivability as well. 17.5 main battery firing range with this one. That includes the legendary upgrade. I really like that one. We're also running Eye in the Sky to be able to use our spotter plane a lot more often. That's really important here on a Zao because you just need more range than 17.5 these days. I really do believe that. So having Eye in the Sky helps us out a ton there. Gun feeder is really nice because the AP is solid. It does a lot of damage. You Citadel things like cruisers very, very well, even at mid-range. And as we saw, even the full pens can add up to massive damage into battleships and their upper belts. You need grease the gears as well because the rudder turn rate of these main guns is quite slow. You can outturn these guns as well, so it can be a little sluggish to play like that. Getting used to that again. A lot of the new ships don't have to deal with that, so having to deal with that again, it's fine, but you definitely want grease the gears. I'm taking Superintendent as well as Survivability Expert, Concealment, all just to help the survivability. We still only have 30 millimeters of armor. Zao's not a small ship. It's not massive either, but it's not small. And again, there is a lot of overmatch to deal with, which is difficult. Adrenaline Rush, of course, because this is one of the best upgrades you can get for damage. And I'm taking Outnumbered, not top grade. With 9.9 kilometer detect, and a ship that wants to play outside of its detection range, I don't know how often I would activate it. Maybe I would activate it more often than I think, but again, going off of better dispersion equals more damage as well. Outnumbered also means we're playing on a flank where the enemy team is probably pushing in, and ship speed is really nice for helping us dodge that incoming fire. I need to use this one more. I complain about dispersion, but then I don't use Outnumbered on these cruisers, right? I don't know. I guess I just forget it exists. I do need to play with this one more because it's really nice to have 10% better dispersion. That's a lot, even if you don't have it active all the time. If you do not have the legendary upgrade, this one gives you range as well as dispersion. Really nice. I personally would recommend range. I'm not sure why reload would be the recommended upgrade. Range mod getting you over 18 kilometers of range here. 18.8 is very nice. But you know what's funny? I swapped over to this one and I instantly noticed the dispersion loss. It felt pretty bad, I gotta say. Hitting some smaller targets, DDs, angled light cruisers at longer range. Pretty consistent with the legendary upgrade. Not as much with the range mod there. Perhaps I was aiming poorly, perhaps I was bad luck, perhaps it was an aim bug, I don't know. But the games I did play with range mod, I could tell. Although maybe that was just confirmation bias, I don't know. But personally, definitely sticking with the legendary upgrade here. Unfortunate that that's the case for you newer players. I understand these legendary upgrades can be very expensive to get and take a lot of time. And for Zao, I really like it. I really, really do. If you're going to go with the Lighthouse build, this is more standard build. But if you're going to go with the Lighthouse build, yeah, you're going to go steering gears, getting your rudder down to 4.6, and you still have 11-kilometer detect. Really nice. If we swap over to a commander that I was using with the more Lighthouse-focused build, very greedy, but does a lot of damage. It buffs our HE alpha damage even further. So 10k plus HE salvos are even more common. We're getting reload buffs from top grade. We actually proc much more often because 14-kilometer detect, we actually are going to have people within that a lot more often than the 9.9. And then outnumbered again for the survivability aspect of the speed and just more damage from our dispersion being better. This one's hard to use, certainly. Notice we're still taking Eye in the Sky. This one I think is just, it's such a good skill on a ship like a Zao, as well as Hindenburg. They just really want that extra little bit of range because the meta is so passive these days. Maybe I've overstated the passive meta. I don't know. You can let me know what you think about Zao and how it plays these days. I really like this buff. I really like this change. I think it's a really nuanced, interesting way to make the ship more comfortable to play without making it just flat out overpowered, like we've seen with Colombo buffs last year. Maybe I'm too hard on Colombo too. I don't know. But I just hate fighting that accurate sap, insane damage at any range. I don't know. Maybe I'm overly stating Colombo. I don't know. But Zao is an interesting buff. I like this one a lot. Here's the armor, in case you're wondering. It is 30 here, 25 bow. Here's your citadel. Above water, bit of a weird angled stepped thing, so it is good and bad in that way. I suppose the water line here in the turrets does help us out a little bit. You got to aim really center mass to get the above water citadel. If you're playing a battleship or a cruiser and trying to citadel a Zao, you do have to aim towards the middle, I suppose, to actually get this thing. And the rudder shift here with this full Lighthouse build is really nice. Combined with these better turret angles, torp angles, means we can very comfortably use all of our firepower and still be able to dodge and maneuver very comfortably at those mid to long ranges. It's a good change. It's a well-designed change, but the meta can be a little bit too passive for it, in my opinion. But maybe that was just the matchmaker I had on that day. And it could be a lot better if I played it some more. You'll have to let me know in the comments down below. As you can see, we have a ton of buff ships in the game. The only one here that isn't just a buffed ship is Belfast, because I don't have a Belfast 43. This is a bit of a placeholder to remind me which ships that I need to be playing. So look forward to that over the next few weeks. We got a lot of ships to take a look at, but Zao had to be first because this ship keeps coming back every once in a while. A change here and there. It was more HP last time. This time, better turret angles. In my opinion, a much needed buff, a much needed change to make the ship much more comfortable. And I'm really happy Wargaming decided to change Zao in this way. Perhaps we could see some other ships that have atrocious turret angles changed as well, because it's really, really nice. And I don't think it impacts the game too hard. It just makes those ships much more comfortable to play. Looking at you, GK. Thank you very much for watching, and have a great rest of your day.